What would you do if the most dangerous night of your life started with a hand over your mouth and a whisper in the dark? He had everything. A penthouse that kissed the Chicago skyline, a name that moved markets, and the unshakable certainty that he had built something untouchable. She had a job title that put her beneath his notice, a past she never talked about, and instincts that had never, not once in her life, led her wrong. He came home early. She was already waiting. Not for him, but for the men who had come to make sure he never left. One hand over his mouth, one whispered warning in the dark, and suddenly the billionaire who had never needed a single person in his life had to decide, in the space of a breath, whether to trust the woman he had never once truly seen. What happens next will shatter everything he thought he knew, about his father, about his empire, and about the woman who stood between him and a bullet he never knew was coming. Stay until the end. This one will break your heart before it puts it back together. If this story already has you holding your breath, hit that subscribe button right now, because we are just getting started, and drop a comment below. Whose side are you on? The billionaire who thought he was untouchable, or the woman who always knew the truth? Tell me everything. I read every single one. The city of Chicago does not sleep. It hums. It pulses against the winter dark like something alive, like something that holds the memory of every secret ever whispered inside its walls. On a Thursday evening in February, the temperature outside was 9 degrees and falling, and the skyline was doing what the Chicago skyline does in cold weather, burning brighter, as though cold had sharpened every edge of every light. On the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, in a residence that cost more per square foot than most families earned in a year, everything was still. Zoe Carpenter had learned a long time ago that silence was not the absence of danger. Silence was where danger lived. Silence was where it settled in and breathed and waited and chose its moment. She had spent 4 years in the United States Army learning exactly that, in places where the quiet before an ambush felt indistinguishable from the quiet of an ordinary afternoon. The mind could be fooled by silence. The body could not. The body knew, and you had to learn to stop arguing with it. She had been working for Kwak Jae-hyun for 11 months. She knew his schedule the way she knew her own pulse. 6:45 departure every morning, regardless of how late he had worked the night before. Never home before 9 in the evening on a standard day, and on Thursdays, reliably, without exception, he stayed at the office until close to midnight. Tonight was Thursday. It was 7:43 in the evening. He was not supposed to be home for another 4 hours, minimum. She had noticed the men at 7:21. 2 had come up through the service elevator, the one that required a 6-digit access code that she had memorized and never shared with anyone, which meant they had obtained it from somewhere else, from someone with a level of operational access she had not been aware of. The 3rd had come through the ventilation override panel behind the kitchen, the one that appeared on no residential blueprint she had been shown when she took the job. She had stood very still in the hallway shadow and catalogued everything with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has spent years doing exactly this. The earpieces, small and skin-toned and professionally fitted. The tactical gloves. The measured, deliberate way they moved through a space they had clearly studied in advance, checking the same locations in the same sequence, which meant they were following a floor plan someone had given them. These were not opportunistic intruders. These were professionals who had been given a map and a mission and a timeline. They were looking for Jae-hyun. They had not brought anything that suggested they planned to talk to him when they found him. Zoe had spent the following 22 minutes doing what her training had taught her to do in a situation with 3 hostile actors, no backup, no functional cellular signal. The service elevator had begun transmitting a jamming frequency at 7:23, and 1 civilian to protect who was not yet on the premises. She had neutralized one of the 3 duck in the East Corridor, using the environment rather than any equipment she didn't have on her. She had created 2 choke points. She had located the 1 blind spot in the residence's internal camera network and positioned herself there, against the wall beside the private elevator foyer, the elevator only Jae-hyun used, the one that rose directly from the building's executive parking level. She was holding that position, every nerve in her body tuned to a frequency she hadn't needed in 4 years, when the private elevator chimed. He was home, 4 hours early, and he was about to walk into something he had absolutely no frame of reference for. She moved before she made the conscious decision to move, the kind of motion that happens below thought, in the part of the body that was trained and never untrained. The door slid open. He stepped out, already loosening his tie, already returned to some interior space in his head, doing what he did when the day was ending and the performance of it could come down slightly. He had taken exactly 2 steps into the corridor when she stepped from the shadow beside the built-in cabinet and put her left hand flat across his mouth. He went rigid, every muscle in his body locked in the same instant. The pure animal alarm of a person whose system has registered threat before the conscious mind has caught up. His hands came up by reflex, fast and purposeful. She had positioned herself so that her arm came from his left, and she had braced her body weight before he could pivot. She kept her lips at the exact threshold of audible, barely more than shaped breath against his ear. Don't make a sound if you want to live. For one suspended, crystalline moment, he didn't move. She could feel the furious intelligence in his stillness, could feel the difference between panic and calculation, because she had spent years learning that difference, and it was never subtle once you knew what you were reading. He was not panicking, he was processing. He was assessing the voice, the body weight, the arm position, the words. He was deciding. She applied the faintest directional pressure. He understood it as what it was. He gave the smallest possible nod. She pulled them both backward into the alcove behind the cabinet, pressed flat against the wall, and held the position. 15 seconds. One of the 2 remaining men moved through the corridor not 4 feet from where they stood, close enough that she could hear the precise footfall rhythm she had memorized earlier, the slightly heavier left step that indicated his dominant side. His training was good. His attention was focused on the study corridor, not the entry foyer. He passed. His breathing, she could feel it against her palm, was controlled, deliberate. He was managing himself. She noted that, and moved it into a different category from the one she had kept him in for 11 months. When the footsteps faded into the interior of the residence, she lowered her hand and spoke at the same near-silent register. There are 3 of them. 1 is down. 2 are still active. They entered through the service elevator and the kitchen ventilation override. They've been here 23 minutes. They are armed. They are organized. And they are looking for you specifically. He stared at her in the particular half-dark of the alcove, the city outside making its ambient argument through 40 feet of floor-to-ceiling glass. Enough light to see each other by, not enough to be seen. She watched the information land in him. She watched it move through whatever process he used to receive difficult realities. And the thing she noticed, the thing that she moved immediately and permanently into the category labeled something to think about later, was that he did not argue with a single word of it. He did not say that was impossible or who are you to tell me, or any of the things that most people said when the world revised itself without their permission. He asked the only question that mattered. Where is the 3rd one right now? And something shifted in her chest, small and involuntary and inconvenient, because that was exactly the right question. That was the question a person asked when they were built for pressure. When their instinct, even in extremis, was to gather information rather than shed it. East corridor, moving toward the study. He'll sweep back in approximately 4 minutes. There's a window. The study has a secondary panel. Behind the east bookcase. Biometric. I know about the panel. I don't believe they do. We should move now. He looked at her. It was a different kind of looking than any she had received from him in 11 months of employment. Not the absent, functional acknowledgement of someone noting that the coffee was where it was supposed to be, that the correspondence was sorted correctly, that things were running as expected. This was the look of a person taking full inventory, recognizing, with the particular clarity that only real danger produces, that the woman standing in front of him was not what he had believed she was. She had worked for this man for 11 months. She had been invisible to him for all of them. She had not imagined she would become visible like this. Kwak Jae-hyun had come to the United States at 18 with a suitcase, a partial scholarship, and a specific variety of determination that has no precise English translation. A Korean concept his mother used when she spoke of his grandfather, who had rebuilt a family from nothing after the war by simply refusing, every single day, to stop. He had enrolled in a state university in Indiana, worked 3 jobs, graduated in 3 years, and been offered a position at a financial firm in New York that he accepted and then left 14 months later to start his own company. He was 25. The company was a consulting operation with 4 employees, including himself. By 28, it had 12. By 30, it was a conglomerate. By 34, which was this specific Thursday in February, Kwak Industries operated across 11 countries and employed 14,000 people. He had done it himself. That was the story he told, the one that had appeared in profiles and on conference panels and in the business press, told in language like self-made and visionary and built from nothing. He believed it completely, not from vanity alone, but from the genuine truth that he had worked 18-hour days for over a decade, and that the company existed because of a level of will and intelligence and capacity for sustained effort that he had earned through practice. The story was true. It was simply incomplete. His father, Kwak Sung-jin, had died 4 years ago at 68. A hospital in Seoul. A brief illness that moved faster than expected. A phone call at 3 a.m, a flight booked in the hour that followed, arriving too late by 90 minutes. Jae-hyun had stood at the funeral in the particular way of men who have not yet found the door to their grief, and so stand outside it very still, performing something that looks enough like composure that no one asks them to be otherwise. He had loved his father. He had spent his adult life building something he believed would have made that man proud. What he did not know, what Sung-jin had spent decades ensuring he would not know, was that the seed capital funding Kwak Industries' first year had not come from the bank loan his father had described to him in detail during a dinner the week before launch. It had come from an arrangement made in the late 1990s, when Jae-hyun was 11 years old and in school in Seoul, and entirely unaware that his father, in financial difficulty after a failed business venture, had accepted capital from men who moved money across borders through mechanisms that left no trace in any official record. Men who ran operations in Seoul and Tokyo and Los Angeles under names that appeared in no legitimate registry. The agreement had terms. Sung-jin would receive the capital. His operations would be financially clean on paper, and he would pay interest at intervals and a final lump sum when the time came. He had paid the interest for over 2 decades. Faithfully. The way a man pays a debt, he cannot escape, and is too ashamed to discuss. And then he had become ill, and the final payment, a number that would have required liquidating assets his son had spent a decade building, had not been made. When he died, the debt did not die with him. It transferred, not legally, not in any document, but in the understanding of the organization that held it. The debt belonged now to the son who had inherited the empire it had helped build. They had given Jae-hyun 4 years. A courtesy extended. It was explained much later, out of respect for grief. The moment had now arrived. He did not know any of this yet. What he knew, crouched in the alcove of his own home beside a woman he had employed for 11 months without once inquiring where she came from, was that 3 professionals had entered his residence tonight with the kind of precision that required inside information, and that the woman who had managed his household for nearly a year moved through threat the way other people moved through ordinary rooms, without hesitation, without wasted motion, without fear. He had questions. He was beginning to understand that he was not going to enjoy any of the answers. Zoe Nadia Carpenter had turned 31 in November. She had been 23 when she enlisted, and 27 when she came home, or when she was made to come home, which was a categorically different thing. She had grown up in Cincinnati, the second of 4 children, in a household organized around the idea that people were responsible for each other, and that running toward difficulty was the only dignified response to it. Her mother had been a registered nurse for 30 years. Her father had been a firefighter. These were not people who flinched. They had not raised children who flinched. The Army had recognized something in her early, a combination of spatial intelligence and emotional regulation that her first commander described in her evaluation as a gift for controlled environments, meaning that the more chaotic the situation, the more clearly she saw it. She had been promoted twice before her 26th birthday. She had been assigned to a unit doing work she was not permitted to describe, in locations she was not permitted to name, alongside 6 other people she trusted with the absolute unconditional trust that develops between people who have only each other between themselves and the worst possible outcome. The incident had happened on a Tuesday in March, a mission that was supposed to be a standard extraction, a term that already contains more contingency than it sounds like, but that within its own parameters meant a known location, verified intelligence, a clear path in and a clear path out. The intelligence was not verified. Someone had gotten to it at the source, had fed them false coordinates, false timing, a false picture of what they were walking into. And they had arrived at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong understanding of the situation. Which is to say, the most dangerous understanding a person can have in a place where the wrong understanding gets people killed. 3 members of her unit were injured. 1 was killed. David Reeves, 29, Savannah, Georgia. She had spent 11 days in a military hospital in Germany, with a concussion and other injuries she recovered from in a time frame doctors characterized as remarkable, and she characterized as beside the point, because recovery was recovery, and David was still dead. The investigation that followed was thorough in the way that institutional investigations are thorough, comprehensive at the surface, and careful not to go too deep in directions that led to people with the kind of seniority that makes thoroughness inconvenient. They identified that the intelligence had been compromised. They identified a chain of transmission. They could not or would not close the chain at its source, could not put a name and a face to the original breach, the specific person who had sold her unit's coordinates to people who had paid well for them. Zoe was given an honorable discharge and the kind of institutional sympathy that comes with no accountability attached to it. She was 27, and she had watched David Reeves's parents receive a folded flag, and nobody had answered for why. She had spent the next 2.5 years looking. Not through official channels. She understood what official channels were worth, had measured their worth in 11 days of a German hospital and a flag-draped casket. Through her own methods. The slow, methodical accumulation of information that her training had made her very good at, and her grief had made her very motivated to pursue. She had found names. She had found connections. She had followed a chain across 3 countries that led eventually to an organization operating out of Seoul through multiple corporate shells. An organization that moved capital for people who needed capital moved invisibly, and that had employed, at a specific point in time, a handler with access to classified military deployment information that no private entity should have been anywhere near. She had found the connection to Kwak Sung-jin 18 months ago. Not a direct operational link. The man's name appeared in no record she could access. But his money had moved through the same channels, in the same periods, and the handler she had traced to the intelligence breach had been on a retainer payment structure that led, through 4 corporate layers, to a holding company Sung-jin had quietly dissolved 6 months before his death. When she found it, she sat with it for 3 months before she believed it. Then she spent 2 more months deciding what to do. She had not taken the job to harm Jae-hyun. She needed that to be understood, though she was aware she was not in a position to demand that understanding from anyone. She had taken it because she needed proximity to the only living connection to a puzzle she had spent 2.5 years building, and because she needed to know what the son knew, whether he was part of it, whether he was protected by it, whether he was a beneficiary in ways he understood or in ways he didn't. She had expected 3 months to find out. She had found out, conclusively, within the first 4. Jae-hyun Kwak knew nothing. Whatever his father had done and hidden, he had hidden it completely. With the practiced care of a man who had spent decades making sure his son would never have to carry it. She had stayed after that, not because she had more to learn, but because she had not been able to make herself leave a man alone inside a situation he didn't know existed. She had told herself it was protective. She had told herself it was professional, that she was maintaining proximity to the investigation, that she might need access, that there were practical reasons. She had told herself a lot of things for 11 months. Some of them were true. She had not told herself that she had been leaving the light on in the kitchen on the morning she knew he would be arriving early, because he had left one on for her first by accident, and she had noticed the difference it made in a dark kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, and she had wanted to give that back to him. She had not told herself that. It was the one thing she had kept from herself, because it was the one that would have made everything else impossible to maintain. She took him to the library. Of all the rooms in the residence, it was the most defensible. No exterior-facing walls. Solid built-in shelving on 3 sides that would impede a line of sight and slow any projectile. 2 entrances, both visible from a single interior position. She put him in the corner behind the reading chair and took the position she needed, standing so that she could see both doorways simultaneously without being centered in either of them. He did not question the strategy. He did not argue about the position she assigned him. He adjusted, took the space, and held it. She noted that. She noted everything about him tonight in the way she had been trained to note things. Without sentiment, with precision, updating the file she held in her head with each new data point. 90 seconds of silence. She was counting the micro sounds of the second man moving through the interior of the residence. She had mapped his search pattern earlier and could track him by the rhythm of it, the particular cadence of professional footsteps on the transition between the marble entry and the carpeted hallway. When he was far enough into the south wing, she allowed herself a fraction of her attention for the room she was in. He spoke first, very quietly. The precise volume of someone who understood immediately and intuitively how quiet was the correct amount of quiet. You moved wrong, 3 months ago, when you brought the mail to my office. I remember thinking that the way you came through the door was wrong for the role. She kept her eyes on the nearer of the 2 doorways. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that I was looking for something that wasn't there because I was tired. You weren't tired, she said. Your read was accurate. A beat of silence. How long were you in? 4 years. Specialized operations. Why are you working as a maid? That's a long answer. We have some time. She glanced at him. Just once, briefly. The kind of look that gathers information without becoming a look. He was watching her with the focused, contained attention she had observed from across rooms for 11 months. The look he used when he was in the middle of understanding something and had decided not to stop until he understood it fully. She had watched that look in board meetings she had overheard, in phone calls she had passed through a room during. She knew what it meant. It meant she should be careful about what she decided to say and what she decided to keep. I left the army 4 years ago. There was something I was looking into. I needed to be somewhere that didn't make me visible while I did it. And that somewhere was my apartment. Yes. He held that, didn't comment. Are you a threat to me? She thought about the question, not because she was uncertain about the answer, but because she wanted to give him the exact answer, rather than the comfortable one. There was a version of no that was reassurance, and a version of no that was information. She gave him the second version. No, I'm not a threat to you. I never was. But you're here for a reason that isn't housekeeping. Yes. And those men... He stopped himself. She could feel him working through it, eliminating the obvious possibilities, arriving at the one that remained. They're not here because of you. It was a statement, not a question. She answered it as one. No, they're here because of your father. The silence that followed was different from all the ones before it. She felt the density of it change, felt it become something that had weight. She watched his face process a sentence it had not been prepared for and could not immediately route into any existing framework. She watched him hold it anyway, not flinch, not demand immediately that she explain or prove or retract. Just hold it. Before he could form the first question, she heard the footstep rhythm shift in the south corridor. The second man was redirecting. He's moving. Stay down. Don't move regardless of what you hear. If I'm not back in 4 minutes, go to the biometric panel and call 911. Stay inside the room until law enforcement reaches you. She was through the doorway before he could respond. She took the second man down in the east corridor. It was controlled and it was not painless, and it produced more sound than she would have preferred, but it was decisive, and that was what mattered. When she straightened up, her left side ached along the ribs where she had taken the impact against the wall, the kind of ache that tells you something structural may have moved, and she filed the information and kept moving because filing the information and keeping moving was the only viable response. She moved toward the kitchen, the last confirmed position of the third man, the leader, the one who had moved with the most deliberation and done the least searching because he already knew precisely what he was there to do. She had assessed him from the beginning as the most dangerous of the three. Not because he was the largest or the loudest, he wasn't either, but because he was the most patient. Patience in a threat is always the thing to watch. He was waiting for her in the kitchen doorway. He had heard the corridor. He was better than she had hoped, and she had not hoped for much. He had his weapon leveled, and she was 2 steps past the point of elegant options. They faced each other across the ambient glow of the city coming in through the kitchen windows. All that cold Chicago light pouring over granite and steel, and the particular tableau of 2 people deciding what the next 10 seconds contained. He spoke in Korean. She understood Korean. She had studied it intensively for 3 months during the year before she took this job, adding it to the working vocabulary she had acquired through prior need. He said she should be smart about this. This was not her matter. The debt was between Kwok and the organization, a private arrangement she had stumbled into. She could walk out with her life, which was more than she'd been owed, and go back to whatever she had been doing before tonight. Then he said something else. A name. The name of his principal, the person he worked for, the head of the operation he was part of. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in 4 years. She had seen it in documents. She had traced it through accounting records and corporate registries and years of patient reconstruction. She had said it to herself in the particular internal voice of someone who is not yet ready to say a thing out loud, because saying it out loud makes it real in a different way. She had never heard another person say it casually, in the tone of someone mentioning an employer. In the time it took to hear it and process it, she understood something she had not understood before this moment. The organization threatening Jae-hyun's life, and the organization that had destroyed her own, were not 2 separate problems she had arrived at from 2 separate directions. They were the same problem, the same people. The handler who had sold her unit's coordinates had worked for the same structure, now sending armed men into a Chicago penthouse. The man who had stood between her and closure for 4 years, and the man who had decided Jae-hyun's father's debt was now Jae-hyun's problem, were connected through the same chain she had spent 2 years tracing. She was standing at the center of the same thing she'd been circling for 4 years, and the man on the other side of it was holding a weapon and waiting for her to decide. She could step aside. He was right that this was not a legal obligation. She had no formal duty to Jae-hyun, no contract beyond the employment arrangement she had entered under circumstances she had never fully disclosed. She could lower her hands and back toward the exit and let the next hour unfold without her. She thought of David Reeves. She thought of him very specifically, not abstractly, not as a symbol of what she'd lost or what she was owed, but as the actual person. The way he called his grandmother every Sunday without fail. The way he took the longest, most complicated shifts without being asked. The way he talked about the restaurant, the specific dishes, the layout of the dining room, the specific neighborhood in Savannah where he wanted it to be. with the particular warmth of a person who genuinely believes the future is a place they're going to reach. She stepped forward. What followed was 40 seconds of the most focused effort she had produced in 4 years. She was not unscathed. She absorbed 2 impacts that she would feel for the next 3 weeks, and would never describe in detail to anyone who asked. She also remained upright at the end of it, which was the only evaluation metric that mattered tonight. She was sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the island, and her palm pressed flat against her left side, when she heard him come through the door. He had not stayed in the library. She had given him clear instructions, and he had chosen not to follow them. And she found, sitting on the floor of his kitchen in the aftermath of the worst Thursday either of them would likely have in their lives, that she could not summon any anger about it. He stopped in the entrance and took in the room in one sweep. Then he looked at her. She looked back. "You didn't stay," she said. The noise stopped. I needed to know what that meant. And it meant you. He crossed the kitchen without another word and crouched down in front of her and looked at her hand pressed to her side. His jaw was set, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was controlling something that wanted to be louder than he intended to let it. His hands, when he carefully moved her palm to look at what was beneath it, were completely steady. She noticed that. She filed it in the same place she had been filing things about him all night. Hospital? Ribs. Bruised. Maybe one cracked. I've had worse. That is not actually reassuring. It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be accurate. He held her gaze for a moment, and something moved across his face that she did not have an established name for. Not the recalibration of the alcove, not the focused data gathering of the library. Something older and less managed. The expression of a person encountering a feeling they have not had before and do not yet know what to call. He sat down on the kitchen floor beside her. The city glowed through the windows. The jamming signal had died with the third man's equipment, and she could feel the signal returning to her phone like a slow tide. She called 911. She gave the address, the situation, what they would find, and where. She answered the dispatcher's questions in the flat, organized tone of someone who has called emergency services in difficult conditions before. She was told to stay on the line. While she waited, she told him about his father. She told him all of it. The seed capital and the agreements made in the late 90s and the more than 20 years of interest payments made faithfully by a man who had been too ashamed to tell his son the truth and too afraid of the consequences to stop paying. The debt that had transferred at death, because that was how these arrangements worked, legally invisible and structurally absolute. The 4 years of grace the organization had extended before deciding the patience had run long enough. She told him about herself, about the mission and the compromised coordinates, and the 11 days in Germany and David Reeves from Savannah, who had wanted to open a restaurant and had been 29 years old on a Tuesday in March when the wrong intelligence put them in the wrong place, about the years of tracing, about the holding company, about the name she had heard tonight in the kitchen doorway, spoken like an employer's name. She told him that the man who had led the team tonight and the man who had sold her unit's coordinates 4 years ago were part of the same structure, that the chain she had spent years building led to the same organization that had decided his father's debt was now his to pay. She told him that she had taken this job to understand what he knew, and stayed when she understood that he knew nothing, and had not been able to leave a man alone inside a situation he had no map for. She told him she was sorry for the architecture of it, not for being here. She would not pretend to be sorry for that because she had kept him alive, and she would do it again without hesitation, but for the hidden structure. For 11 months of proximity built on a reason he had not been told. He listened to all of it without interrupting. She had braced herself for anger. She had braced herself for the specific sharp-edged response she had observed him use when something breached his perimeter without permission. She had watched him do it in business contexts, the clean excision of anything that did not behave as it was supposed to. She had thought she was ready for it. He did not do it. He listened, completely and without performance, the way she had only ever seen very particular kinds of people listen. People who understood that getting the complete information was more valuable than the satisfaction of reacting to it. When she was done, the silence was long. The city kept at it outside. Below them, faint and growing, she could hear the first sirens. "My father," he said, and stopped. He breathed. He used to say that the most important thing a man could build was something that outlasted him. He said it constantly. I thought he meant the company. She said nothing. He outlasted himself, just not in the way he meant. She watched him hold something that didn't have a clean shape. She knew what that was. She had been holding things without clean shapes for 4 years. There was no useful thing to offer in the middle of that, and she was honest enough with herself to know it. The sirens were close now. He turned to look at her. "You've been carrying this for 11 months, sitting across from me in this apartment, knowing everything I didn't know." "Yes, that's..." He stopped. She watched him decide not to say whatever the sentence had been going to be. "What were you going to do with it? What you found?" "Before tonight. I was still deciding. I needed the chain to be airtight before I took it anywhere official. 1 more month and I think I had it. And now?" She thought about 4 years of searching, and 11 months of waiting, and 40 seconds in a kitchen that had resolved things she had not expected to survive long enough to resolve. Now the FBI is going to have a very detailed case file delivered to them in the next 24 hours. The chain is complete. Every document I have goes with them. I want to help with that. She looked at him. "Whatever my father's estate retained. Whatever runs through Kwok Industries that I can legally provide, and I'll work with counsel to maximize what that is. Whatever I have access to that completes the picture, I want to give it." She assessed this with the same forensic attention she had applied to every piece of intelligence she had ever received. She was looking for the performance of it, for the version of this offer that was about managing the situation, or controlling the narrative, or minimizing personal exposure. She did not find any of those things. What she found was a man who had just learned that his father had lied to him for decades, and that the empire he believed he had built cleanly had a shadow beneath its foundation, and who had arrived within minutes at the conclusion that the only viable response was to illuminate every part of the shadow and let what was there be seen. She believed him. "That's going to complicate your life substantially," she said. "My life has already been substantially complicated." Tonight clarified that the complication existed before I knew about it. I'd rather engage with it directly. The elevator chimed. The first officers were coming up. She braced her weight against the island and pushed herself upright. His hand was there before she had finished deciding to stand. Not grabbing, not directing, just present. A steadying point. She took it without making anything of it. They were standing when the door opened. It took until 4 a.m. for the last investigator to leave. The FBI had arrived at 2, the combination of a shell company connection, a foreign criminal organization flag, and a compromised intelligence thread from a 4-year-old military case had escalated things faster than either of them had anticipated. Zoe gave 3 separate statements to 3 separate people with 3 different specific angles on what they needed from her. She gave each one with the same precision and the same organization, which she could tell surprised some of them, and which she did not bother to explain. He gave 2 statements and called his attorney at 1:15, which was the correct decision, and which she had told him was the correct decision, without telling him that she was in a position to know. When the last person was gone, the apartment was still in the way that spaces are still after they have held a lot of people, a quality of inhabited emptiness, slightly different from ordinary quiet. The kitchen had been photographed and documented and returned to them, which felt like a strange formality given what had happened in it. The paramedics had confirmed what she already knew about her ribs, and given her a list of instructions she would follow the ones that made sense. Outside, the city had moved through its last hours of deep night into the particular gray-blue quality of the hour before sunrise, when Chicago becomes briefly, improbably contemplative. He made tea. She sat at the island and watched him navigate a kitchen he had never had reason to learn, and she did not point out that she was always the one who knew where things were. He found the kettle on the second attempt, and the mugs on the third. He moved through the search with the same quiet lack of drama he had applied to everything tonight, and she watched him and felt something in her chest settle. Very slowly, incrementally. The way structures settle when the pressure that was working against them is finally released. He put the mug in front of her and sat across the island. "The reason you stayed," he said, carefully, like a person who has thought about the exact phrasing. "You said it was because I was the only innocent person in the situation, because you had seen too many innocent people pay for other people's choices." "Yes." Was that the complete reason? Not a question. The distinction mattered to her. She looked at her tea. She thought about 11 months of keeping everything in exactly the configuration she had put it in. She thought about the specific discipline of that. The daily practice of knowing something and choosing not to move it. She had been very good at it. She was no longer sure it was something she wanted to be good at. "No," she said. "That wasn't the complete reason." He waited. He was very good at waiting. "You left a light on in the kitchen. The first time was probably an accident, but after that..." She stopped. He looked at her steadily. "Because after that I noticed it every time, and I started doing the same thing, on mornings when I knew you were coming in early." A silence. "I know," he said. She looked up. "I noticed. I didn't say anything about it because I didn't know what to say about it. I also wasn't sure I wanted to examine too closely what it meant that I was leaving a light on in my kitchen for someone I told myself I barely knew." The city was lightening outside. The gray-blue of pre-dawn was beginning to resolve into the specific pale gold that February mornings make in the upper atmosphere. That light that looks like it has come a very long way and arrived slightly tired. "I was going to leave in 3 weeks," she said. "I had a plan. 3 more weeks, give notice, walk out, figure out what to do with the documentation." "What stopped you the first time?" "The first time you should have left and didn't." She thought about it honestly. "You put every book back exactly where you found it, in the file room. Every time. I had not expected that." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but in the family of one. The expression she had been learning for 14 months now. The one that was warmer than anything his public profile suggested was possible. "And I grew up in a small apartment with 4 people and 2 shelves of books. You don't leave a mess of someone else's things." "No," she said, "you don't." The silence that followed was not the silence of things unsaid. It was the silence of 2 people who have said the things that mattered and are now resting in the knowledge that they were said. After a while, he said, "There's something else I want to do, beyond the documentation." She waited. "I want to establish a foundation. With the original amount, whatever my father's records document as having come from those sources, I want to find it and quarantine it and use it as the seed for something that does the opposite of what it came from. Veterans, services. Specifically for people who came home from situations that were never properly closed. Cases like yours. People who fell through the official structure." She held very still. He had not delivered it as a grand gesture. His voice had the same tone he used for business decisions, the level, considered tone of a man who has already worked through a problem and arrived at the only conclusion that made logical and ethical sense. He was not performing generosity. He was describing a decision he had already made. David Reeves from Savannah, Georgia, had wanted to open a restaurant. He had talked about it the way people talk about futures they genuinely believe they're going to inhabit. He would not inhabit his. But the specific people responsible for that, the chain she had traced, the names she had found, those people were now in a federal case file with her documentation attached. They were not going to do it again. That was not everything. It was not enough. It was something real. "Tell me about him," Jae-hyun said. "I'm your colleague." She looked up. "You've been carrying that alone for 4 years. I have the rest of the night. Tell me about him." She picked up the mug and felt its warmth against both palms. She thought about the weight of a thing you have been holding alone for a long time, and what it costs to put it down, and what it means to be offered somewhere to put it. She told him about David Reeves, about his grandmother's recipes and the restaurant layout he had described in detail during 3 deployments, and the way he took every difficult shift without being asked because he was the kind of person who understood that someone had to take them. She talked until the city outside had moved through its gray-blue and into its pale gold and into its full February morning, white and clear and cold and specific. He listened with the complete, undefended attention she had come to understand was the most valuable thing he knew how to give. And she accepted it in the way you accept something from a person who means it, without deflecting, without minimizing, fully. At some point, in the middle of a sentence about Savannah in summer and the kind of food that makes people feel like they have arrived somewhere safe, she understood that the wall was gone. Not damaged, not cracked, gone. She didn't try to rebuild it. She sat in the kitchen light of an early Friday morning in Chicago and let the wall be gone. The investigation took 14 months. It was not clean or linear, or without its difficult stretches. There were legal challenges and procedural delays, and 2 moments when it seemed like the chain might not close the way she had built it. When the defense moved to suppress documentation on technical grounds that required her to testify in rooms full of people authorized to decide whether 4 years of work had been done correctly, it had been done correctly. She had made sure of that. The handler was indicted in month 9. The name she had heard spoken in the kitchen doorway, the name of the man at the top of the chain, said so casually, like an employer's name, appeared at the top of that indictment. She read it 3 times. Not because she needed to, because she had been waiting 4 years to see it on something official, in black ink, with a federal seal attached to it. The Chicago operation was dismantled in month 11. Korean authorities, working in coordination with the FBI, closed the Seoul structure in month 13. The organization did not cease to exist. Organizations like that contract and reform, find new shapes, relocate their centers of gravity. But the specific network, the specific people, the specific chain that had sold her unit's coordinates and killed David Reeves and threatened Jae-hyun on a Thursday in February. Those people were named and held and would not do any of it again. It was not everything. It was more than she had believed, for a long time, that she would get. Kwak Industries survived it. Jae-hyun had made the decision to disclose proactively and completely. And disclosure, coupled with the 14 years of legitimate operation and 14,000 employees who had built real things, shaped how the story was told. It was not without cost. There were board members who left, and investors who needed extended conversations and a quarter of earnings that reflected the noise. He absorbed all of it with the same quality she had observed in the kitchen alcove on the worst night either of them had had. Not without feeling it, but without being moved from the decision he had already made. The foundation was announced in month 3. Its first grant cycle received more applications than either of them had anticipated. By month 12, it had funded 27 cases, veterans, intelligence personnel, first responders, where official channels had closed too soon. None of it brought David Reeves back. It brought something forward in his name, which was the only direction available. She was in Seoul when the final indictment was announced. She had gone to work with Korean investigators on the portions of the chain that crossed their jurisdiction. She had also gone because Jae-hyun had a board meeting that week and had mentioned, without making anything of it, that the Han River was worth seeing, and he knew a restaurant she would like, and he had already made a reservation if she wanted to use it. She had said yes without making anything of that either. The river was wide and cold, and the city rose up around it in a way she found unexpectedly beautiful. All those layers of history pressed up against glass and light, and the particular motion of a city that has been rebuilt so many times, It has absorbed the idea of rebuilding into its character. The restaurant was small and warmly lit, and the food was the kind that tastes like someone made it with the specific intention of reminding you that warmth is real and available and not something you have to earn. They talked for 3 hours. About his mother, who had responded to the news about his father, not with disbelief, but with the particular grief of a woman who had always suspected there was something she was not being told, and who had called him immediately to say only, "You should have told me. I would have worried differently." About Zoe's mother in Cincinnati, who had said, "I always knew your instincts would take you somewhere unusual," which was her mother's way of expressing pride. About Seoul in February, and what the river looks like at different hours. About small things. The kind of conversation that only becomes possible when the large things have already been said. They walked along the river afterward. The cold was the specific, clear cold of February in that city. Sharp, without being cruel. The lights of Seoul reflected in the water and broke apart with each movement of the current and reassembled imperfectly, beautifully. He stopped walking. She stopped a step later. "I've been thinking about something for 14 months, he said, "and I want to say it. Go ahead." The night I came home early, I left the dinner I was at because I looked at the people across the table from me and understood that none of it was what I actually wanted to be doing. I couldn't identify what I did want. I went home instead of resolving the question. She watched the water. It turns out the question was already being resolved, just not in a way I had the context for yet. She looked at him. "The most important things in my life," he said, "were not built the way I believed they were. The foundation I thought was entirely my own work had things beneath it I was never shown. And I find, that knowing the complete thing, all of it, everything that's complicated and uncomfortable, is entirely preferable to the version that made me feel I had done it alone. I would always rather have the accurate, difficult truth." She understood that he was not speaking only about his father's history. He was precise in his language. He always was. He was speaking about 11 months and a light in a kitchen and a woman who had come into his life with a hidden reason and stayed for one that was harder to categorize. "I left the light on for 11 months for a woman I was employing and telling myself I barely noticed. I think the more honest account is that I noticed everything and had decided, for reasons I understand better now, not to examine what that meant." The river moved. The city did its unending work around them. She thought about who she had been 4 years ago, sitting in a German hospital room knowing that something enormous had been taken from her, and not yet knowing if she would find a way to make it mean anything. She thought about 2.5 years of searching. She thought about 11 months of keeping everything exactly in place. She thought about the morning she stopped keeping it. "You want to know what the category is?" she said. He looked at her. "It's the person who doesn't look away from the complicated true thing, who's in the room whether or not you told them to stay, who leaves the light on not because it's their job but because they noticed it made a difference and they wanted that for you." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a very accurate category," he said. "It works in both directions," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment in the cold February air with the Han River doing its slow, patient work behind him and Seoul doing its complicated, brilliant thing all around them. And then he did something she had catalogued as possible, but had not seen in 14 months of knowing him. He smiled. Not the almost smile. Not the expression in the family of a smile. The real one. The one that changed the whole geography of his face. She felt it in her chest, like a door opened in a room she had believed was sealed. She stepped forward. She had not stepped aside on the night everything changed. She was not about to start a different practice now. The river moved behind them. The city hummed. The February sky above Seoul was the particular deep clear of a night that has decided to be entirely honest about what it is. Cold and vast and full of light. She had spent 4 years trying to close something. She had spent 11 months holding everything at the exact distance she had placed it. She had spent 14 months watching a man dismantle and rebuild his understanding of his own life with the same quality he brought to everything, completely, without looking away, with the kind of integrity that is not performed because it does not know how to be anything else. She was done holding things at a distance. She was done managing the temperature of things that had earned the right to be warm. The night David Reeves had died, she had stood outside a hospital in Germany at 3 a.m. and asked herself how a person was supposed to go forward from something like that. She had not had an answer. She had gone forward anyway, the way her parents had taught her. Not because she knew where it led, but because standing still was not a thing she was built for. This was where it led. Not the resolution of grief, because grief doesn't resolve, it reshapes, but the evidence that going forward means something. That the years of searching, and the 11 months of staying, and the 40 seconds in a kitchen that had cost her 3 weeks of careful movement and 2 cracked ribs had led somewhere real. That the things you hold for long enough, with enough care and enough honesty, eventually find the shape they were always meant to have. She had stopped stepping aside. She had started stepping toward. It turned out those were not the same direction, and the difference was everything. If this story did something to your heart, if you felt every single moment of that night on the 42nd floor, every shift in the dark, every silence that carried more weight than words, please leave this video a like, because it means more than you know. Subscribe so you never miss a story from this channel. And drop a comment right now. What was the moment that got you? The light in the kitchen? The floor of the kitchen after everything was over? The river in Seoul? I want to know. I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next story.